As we are nearing our final fireside chat, which is going to be an absolute knockout. It is with the legendary investor, author, entrepreneur Brad Feld. So come on down, plenty of the more expensive seats at the front still available. Come one, come all. Take your seats, everybody. Well, GEC, how are we doing? Yes. Have we had a good second day? Well, I've seen the wires have been buzzing, my WhatsApp groups have been tingling, and connections have been taking place. I think I've missed at least 3 UK delegation photos already, and it's only Tuesday. I keep trying to escape, but it's an honor to be here. By the way, in the interest of balance, there's a session on the main stage tomorrow at 1 p.m. with the founder of Epic Angels titled, Why Female Investors Are the Future. Yes, so you should be here for that. That's just one of many excellent sessions taking place right here. So I hope you've had a good day around the village, around the whole venue here, and especially here in our plenary session. Got one more conversation to go. And it's going to be a zinger, I know. It's going to be anchored by somebody who's been supporting entrepreneurs for decades across over 180 countries. I'm talking, of course, about the president of the Global Entrepreneurship Network, Jonathan Ortmans. And he is imminently going to be in conversation with someone who needs little introduction, but I'm going to settle myself because I want to say something about our guest in the hot seat. This is someone who has written incredibly eloquently about startups, about the entrepreneurial journey. It's someone who has funded with his own and with his organization's money the journeys of countless entrepreneurs, including $100 million and billion-dollar success stories. And most of all, it's someone who's given countless hours of their time to help others, but also to set down as a manifesto why giving is so important of our time and of our energy in entrepreneurship. So it's an absolute honor to welcome 2 of my personal role models to the stage. Please give it up for Jonathan Ortmans and Brad Feld. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Brad.
Hi again. I'm not going to make you stretch this time.
You know, Brad, we had to take advantage of the fact that you're here. The last time Brad and I got to do this at the GEC was in Rio, I think in 2013.
Yeah.
And since then, you've not only been busy helping people build companies and building communities, but you've been doing a lot of writing too, and helping to share this. And let me begin by saying, on behalf of the global entrepreneurship community, the precepts that you've suggested are ones that we should think about, have really been at the heart of building what Gen is, because we built Gen from the Global Entrepreneurship Week campaign. And that was a grassroots movement of communities coming together to welcome people from all backgrounds into this amazingly exciting world of testing ideas, figuring out new ways of doing things, but I think doing it at all times with this generosity. So I know you have a new book coming out that we're going to talk about, but I remember the very first thing I read about you before I met you many years ago, and they said his hashtag is Give First. So this isn't anything new for you, this spirit of generosity that we've been talking. It's something that's been around for a while. I want to begin by suggesting, though, talk to me a little bit about this notion that you've always thought about the fact your first thing should be not to say, what do you do, but what can I do for you? Tell me how this has led to such success.
Well, it's probably 2 dynamics. One is something that I learned from other people who were helpful to me. And then the second is this continual curiosity that I've had as I've approached problems, where a lot of the initial contact that I've had with a new idea or a new problem hasn't necessarily generated anything. But as I play with it over time, that evolves into something interesting. And I can personalize it for you, and because you probably don't have any idea of this. I was a judge in the first Global Startup Week.
Ooh.
Right? I mean,
I didn't know that.
And, you know, the linkage to it, if I remember correctly, I have to really dig because it was a long time. It was like 2009 or something like that.
2009 Global Entrepreneur.
I remember Richard Branson being involved.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The group that I was part of included, I'm pretty sure Dick Costello was a judge with me. I was on Dick's board at a company called FeedBurner. By the time that 2009 came around, I think he was still at Google. Hadn't gone on to run Twitter yet. And I think the person that connected me in was a guy named Dean Lindell, who was a longtime YEOer staffer, who was just all these kinds of things where that, for me, experiencing the first Global Entrepreneur Week, not really having a strong feeling about why I was doing it, didn't have any particular goals with it. We had already started Techstars by then, so it was kind of just doing a bunch of stuff. It was another input for me into my own thinking about sort of how to build and evolve startup communities. So just give you that as a very specific example. I think I probably learned this from my parents. My dad's a doctor, my mom's an artist. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. I saw my father as a doctor who is the doctor everybody wants. He was an endocrinologist, and when he sat with a patient, he sat with the patient and listened. And he sat with the patient and engaged, and his patients loved him. And this was during a period of time where doctors could spend time like that with the patient because of the way the healthcare system worked. But I had lots of doctors as a kid. I remember my dentist, all he wanted to do was pull out all my teeth. I mean, the guy scared the shit out of me. But my father was the opposite of that. And I saw that sort of personality and style where, you know, he cared about the people that were his patients rather than viewed them as an entity that he was disconnected from. So I think that's probably the seed of it for me.
So that puts a whole new definition for many people on what it means to be a mentor. So you're going slower, you're listening, you're engaging. You're not making a lot of noise about it. It's more of a quieter thing. It's more of a counselor. You know, my mother was a counselor, and I, you know, often loved to facilitate public meetings. And I always like to make sure that I hear, and then I try to speak back to the person what I think I hear, so that, and I say, did I get it right? Because I might not have heard it the same way. The art of listening, I think, is powerful. Talk to me about your definition then of this mentorship. Obviously, it's similar to the way your father took care of patients. Is that a good analogy?
It's a good analogy. I think there's two concepts that I've tried really hard now to interweave together, and I'll define them both, and then we can go deeper on them. The title of the book that I'm coming out with, it's here today and available today, but it's not published until the end of June, which delights me to no end. I'm working with an independent publisher. They do about a dozen books a year. This is my 9th book. I've never done a book that I had in my hands before Amazon had. Ooh. And it's so satisfying as an author to be able to share the book before the quote official launch date, get feedback, and have people experience it. The title of the book is Give First, The Power of Mentorship. So I've tried to weave these two concepts together. Give First, for me, is a philosophy. It's not a religion. You don't have to follow all the tenets of it. There's not a whole bunch of rules, and if you follow all the rules, good things happen to you. It's a philosophy for the way to exist, and a way to behave, and a way to interact. Frankly, not just in business, but in life. I think I've tried to organize it not in a preachy way around life in general, but I try to link it to those sorts of things. Mentorship is something that when we started Techstars in 2006, the word mentor existed, but it didn't mean much. It was never used in the context of entrepreneurship. And when you heard it, it was almost always used in the context of a big company, where somebody senior in the organization was a mentor to an up-and-comer, a junior person with a lot of potential. And the mentor helped you move up and down this hierarchy. My world has no hierarchies in it. My world is a giant network. I don't have gatekeepers. I have an assistant that helps me not be total chaos all the time. But if you want to reach me, it's brad@feld.com. Send me an email. I'll respond. If I don't respond with another email to your email that says, hey, you said you'd respond, knucklehead. You didn't respond. The second time I'll probably respond because I just missed the first one because I get a lot of email, right?
Yeah.
But that sort of style, we started with this idea of mentorship early in Techstars, trying to understand it. And the first year that we ran a program in 2007, we talked about the idea of an accelerator, which wasn't the thing at the time. There wasn't really a concept of it. There's starting to be some things around it, but it wasn't defined. Incubator was defined and existed, and a lot of incubators had not been particularly fruitful, especially around the internet bubble. So we're trying to figure out this new construct that we labeled accelerator, and we labeled it a mentor-driven accelerator because our mental model was, it's not just about putting the founders together, it's about surrounding them with people that are experienced founders and other people, investors or service providers or people in the community that can help them at the very early stages of their business. Ran the program for a year, and we made a lot of mistakes, and the companies made a lot of mistakes, and we learned a lot about what worked or didn't work from a mentor perspective, but we really still didn't have a good handle on this thing. And ran a second-year program, ran a third-year program. By about the fourth year, we're starting to understand attributes of mentorship that were positive and attributes or behaviors that were negative. And to tie a very specific one, your example of listening is key. A mentor is not saying, you should do this, you should do that. Here's your problem, let me solve your problem.
But often that's what they do.
All the time.
Yep.
I mean, think about the number of times you're working with somebody who's playing a role to try to help you, and they just tell you what to do. Instead, we positioned it and we really started to understand that the mentor should simply be providing data. And it was consistent with how I behave as a board member in investments. I'd be a board member, in a company that might have a couple of thousand employees, and I'm not telling the CEO what she should do. I'm providing hypotheses. I'm providing data. I'm suggesting and responding to the context that person who is the one running the company is asking for feedback, but ultimately not saying, you should do this, you should do that. Another example of a tenet that we were learning was really powerful was being Socratic. The idea of asking questions. Not endlessly asking questions and never getting to the point. That's tedious and no fun. If all the person does, unless you're interviewing somebody, is ask questions, at some point as a founder, you start saying, will you just tell me the answer already? You must know the answer, stop. Yeah. But for this mentor dynamic, eliciting the data, getting the information out of the person, using your own experiences as a mentor to define hypotheses. From my experience, this happened, which, by the way, is essential to organizations well, like EO and YPO. It's something called forum. I don't know how many people here have ever experienced a YEO or EO forum. But when you go through training, what you learn is that you don't, after the person in your forum group, which is a confidential, sort of like your own little board of advisors that meets once a month for 3 hours, one person presents a problem, the other eight or 9 or 10 people spend an hour then asking you questions. They don't tell you what to do, they just ask you questions, and you have to keep talking about the problem that you presented by answering the questions. And then at the end, each person gets to give some information, a statement, and they have to preface it with the idea or the statement from my experience. So it has to be your own experience. It can't be something that you think they should do or something that you've just made up, etc. So by about the 4th year, we had 2 things that were coming together in Techstars. One was this notion of what effective mentorship was, and the other concept, which I wrote about for the very first time in the Startup Communities book, a little paragraph that I didn't think very much of, was a paragraph about give before you get. And in Give Before You Get, I defined something that I thought was essential to getting the flywheel spinning in a startup community. What I didn't realize was that was really the way I behaved.
Yeah.
It was really sort of fundamental to my own behavior. And that then sort of evolved into Give First and mentorship in the context of a core value of how Techstars was helping founders.
It's great the way you've dug deep into these 2 concepts, which ones were feeding the other. So meaningful mentorship required that, but it was such a little part of startup communities or the startup community way. That's just fantastic. Have you had people challenge
all
your
the
approach
time
to this? So I never forget, when you first came out with Startup Community, which of course I devoured quickly because we were trying to understand in a more chaotic way what was really going on at that point, because there was a lot of random things happening and we were trying to make sense of it, and you did a great job at helping us understand that this was a question of a bottom-up community rather than a hierarchy. But at the time, I remember, we very quickly adopted, and I'm afraid we still keep it, which is, we say we're founder first, of course, and we turn around and say the rest of us are the feeders. The founders are the leaders. And I remember once seeing you interviewed, and you said, well, someone was criticizing me from saying, the rest of us are the feeders, or so give me some sense of people who push back on any of. I mean, you can expand it to the bolder thesis if you want.
But that's a fun one. I talked about a little bit on the panel before with Lisa, so maybe some of this for those of you that were here for this is a little redundant, but I'll try to say it a different way. I came out with this book. I said, entrepreneurs are the leaders, everyone else are feeders. It was very provocative because nobody ever thought about it that way. I had a lot of entrepreneurs say some version of, finally somebody said it out loud. I had a lot of entrepreneurs who said, yay. Like, there's a lot of positive affirmation. I didn't immediately have clarity on what I'd made a mistake on. But I started noticing when I was doing a lot of talks around it that people from organizations that were feeders, so government or university or investors like I was as a VC, or service providers, big companies, I'd have these sheepish conversations. And they were sort of tongue-in-cheek sheepish. The person would come up to me and say, blah, 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 we'd talk, and they'd say, I know I'm a feeder, but, right? Or, I'm a feeder, and
I'm just a feeder.
I'm just a feeder, like diminishing it and making the leader and the feeder one up and one down, which was not my goal at all. I did not want to create a hierarchy or a one-up relationship of founder is better than anything else. That was not the goal. So I realized that was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 is the things that I would encounter in these sheepish conversations were people, not organizations. So it was a person who worked for a university, a person who worked for a government entity, a person who worked for a big company. And they weren't embarrassed about they're working for their company, and they weren't, uncomfortable with that, but they were having trouble thinking about what they should do in the context of the startup community while working at the big company. What was the conflict? Was there something that I need to do differently to make sure my big company or the government doesn't screw up what's going on here? I just want to make sure I am not behaving wrong. I didn't want that either. I wasn't trying to tell people how they should behave or not behave. I was trying to get a sort of structural feedback loop. Where it got to, and a lot of this came from experience, sort of listening, by the way, this is a good example of putting things out there and being comfortable that you're going to screw some stuff up. Like, I knew when I wrote Startup Communities, it wasn't all right. It was just a thing, and like we were going to build on it. And in fact, in the second edition, I fixed a lot of those things. I'll end this one punchline though, so we move on, is we came up with this notion of instigators and the idea that people who worked for organizations but played a leadership role in the startup community, we labeled them instigators. A lot of people here are instigators. And we said the startup community is led by founders and instigators. So we kind of made the people part of it the leaders. We also, in the second book, very clearly defined the difference between a startup community and an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And one reason for that was, and I went back and looked at some of my old writing, I was mixing the two terms up too. So I'd call it an entrepreneurial community or a startup ecosystem. And they really were, we were trying to set up two distinct things. A startup community has one goal, and one goal only, and that is to help founders succeed. The entrepreneurial ecosystem is a collection of organizations. Each organization has multiple goals. One of their goals is to help founders succeed in the context of the startup community. And so it was a way to organize things. So when you go to a university and say, well, you know, if you want to be part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, you just have to help founders succeed. And the university says, well, I kind of understand that, but I got some other agendas also.
Right.
Right? And so all of a sudden it gave language to that, which still today is hard. It gets conflated a lot.
Yep.
But, and that's okay, because maybe I'll say it enough times and another 3 people will get it right, or will agree with me, but it's that dynamic. The thing that started this was this notion of people pushing back, people criticizing, people challenging. I welcome and embrace that. I have learned so much in the last 15 years from trying out ideas in public, whether it's writing or talking, and getting feedback that's critical, constructive feedback that ranges from very polite and very friendly to not so much at the other end. You know, you idiot, I hate the idea, you know, you totally don't understand this. I welcome all of it because none of it impacts me emotionally. Every now and then I have a little bit of, I have to deal with my ego a little bit around it, but I really try to listen to it all and synthesize it in a way where it makes the ideas better.
But Brad, is it possible that actually you were not wrong? Okay, when you said I went back and made corrections in the second edition of the book, because one of the things that I observed from this whole experience was, you know, let me give you an analogy. At the Kauffman Foundation, we recognized that angel investor organizations and individual angel investors didn't want to be discovered. And so as a philanthropy, the foundation was able to create within the foundation the Angel Capital Association.
Yep.
And that gave an imprimatur that allowed that conversation to happen. And so I sort of put it to you that maybe, and one of the things that occurred there at Kauffman was there was a sense of saying there's too much noise about institutional venture capital. And everybody in Washington and everybody in the country mixes up institutional venture capital with early stage angels. So we decided at the foundation that we were just going to overemphasize the message about angels. I put it to you that maybe actually you overemphasized the message in a very strategic way about founders, okay? Maybe it wasn't just about founders, it was also about the instigators, it was also about the others that were part of that. But at that time, we needed to disrupt, which I would suggest to you as your third concept here. You needed to disrupt our thinking and exaggerate. You needed to tell people founders, founders, founders. So my analogy is when I talk to my kids, we're going to talk about, first of all in physics, you might teach that sound travels in a straight line. Then you might teach that it travels in a wavy line. Then you teach that actually it does travel in a straight line. So you have to sort of move at different levels. So maybe you have to say, look, it's all about founders, and I'll bring them here, and then I'll say, it's also about instigators. So
I think
I'm giving you a chance to, I'm not trying to be charitable here. I'm trying to say that I want to actually ask this concept, to what degree is it sometimes helpful to sort of throw out a disruptive concept and to sort of move sort of thought processes along like that?
Well, I think it's an essential way of figuring out new ideas and challenging the status quo and challenging existing institutional ideas. And I agree. I mean, when I wrote the leader-feeder dichotomy, it was deliberate. I wanted people to focus their energy around this idea of a startup community on the importance of helping founders be successful, on the founders are at the center. The reason, though, I say that I screwed up a thing is the same kind of thing, just the other way. I'm trying to model for everyone this concept that as time passes, evolving your thinking to incorporate new information and modify your original thinking is very powerful in the context of entrepreneurship. Compare it to, for example, in society today, there is a norm that's promoted by many people that whatever they say is right and they can't ever be wrong. And of course, even if they don't acknowledge that they're wrong and don't acknowledge that they changed their mind, that value is one that I don't agree with. I think that everybody should be willing and able to acknowledge, I got more new information, and this new information has caused me, that thing I said yesterday has caused me now to evolve my thinking. The observation that you're making with this particular example that's so interesting, to me, is that in that time frame, in 2010, 2011, part of my motivation for writing Startup Communities was that the dynamic of what happened with the global financial crisis. And in the global financial crisis, people here are old enough, probably most people remember it, the world was going to end. All banks were going to be nationalized. There was going to be no such thing as a bank. It was going to be owned by the government, and a few countries had to do that. And like life was over as we knew it. The ATM machine was not going to spit out, money. It was dramatic for, certainly months, and the impact of it was felt for years. Coming out of it in 2010, 2011, what I had observed during this period of time where everybody was miserable was that founders just kind of kept doing what they did. They were just starting companies, and it didn't matter what the stock market was doing, and it didn't matter what the interest rate was. Founders started companies because they wanted a company to exist where nothing existed. The other thing that was coinciding with that was I was sick and tired and done with the notion that if you were serious about starting a tech company, the only place to do it was Silicon Valley. I was done with that idea. I had spent many years of my life, I never lived in the Bay Area, but I spent many years of my life now collectively in the Bay Area. I've funded many successful companies there. It's an amazing place to create companies, but I really believed coming out of the global financial crisis that the path forward for us in the notion of global economies was startups and innovation and entrepreneurship. I mean, the same vision you had. And this idea of, for me, of globally democratizing entrepreneurship, of being able to say to anyone in the world, anywhere in the world, if you want to start a company wherever you are, you can. Yep. And helping people understand how to do that. And so that was another part of it for me. People wind the clock back to then 2010, cities were starting to be talked about. The Bay Area, Silicon Valley, of course, ironically, Silicon Valley is not a city, it's a region. Boston, would be mentioned, New York would be mentioned, and Boulder would be mentioned.
Yeah.
And what's wrong with this picture? I mean, we could get the entirety of Boulder, Colorado in 2 square blocks of Manhattan, and we could all live in the high rises. Like the whole place could make it in a couple of blocks. It made no sense to me that these things were were being talked about the same way. And so I wanted to unpack that. And what came to me was it has nothing to do with how big the city is. It has everything to do with this dynamic of what's going on around the startup community, and then that led to that. So again, exaggeration, like, well, if Boulder could be a vibrant startup community that, for example, on a per capita basis at the time, I think had something like 5 or 6, Kaufman did the study, it's 5 or 6 times the per capita of the next most dense startup community, which I think was the Bay Area. But per capita, divide by population, that much. Okay, well, what's going on that's causing this to happen, and why can't we do it in every other city in the world that has at least 50 or 100,000 people in it?
So this is clear evidence that whether we're coming out of the financial crisis of that period of 2008, whether we're coming out of the pandemic, whether we're coming out of our current crisis that I articulated a lot yesterday, that it's pure evidence. It wasn't just a single accident, that the power of the startup community and people having the fortitude, and as I like to say, the boldness, in a way because it's not just about grits and guts, it's a little bit actually, there's a little arrogance in it too. You've got to actually go out and say, actually, I can change the world. And I think, I hope that especially people from different parts of the world take comfort in that. I have some people tell me, we look at certain economies as examples that society can work. And a lot of people in the past have looked to America for that. And one thing they always tell me is the entrepreneurial culture of the United States. And I always got the same pushback, by the way, because, one of the things that I was always telling people was that Silicon Valley did not have a monopoly on entrepreneurship. And it used to drive us nuts because at Kaufman, people would come to us and say, well, we're on our way to Silicon Valley, where it is the epicenter of entrepreneurship. And I used to turn around and say, well, actually, we're building a global movement to remind you that actually entrepreneurship is going to be built and grown in all parts of the world. And isn't it exciting to see where we are now, where we are leveling that playing field? But let me just quickly, if I can, pinpoint to that, because I want to talk a little bit about translating this mindset across cultures. Both of these, if we can, both the meaningful mentorship and, of course, a little bit of the Get First. But let's start, if we can, just very quickly about, how much, am I right or am I wrong? In the sense that I often turn around to the communities that gather for this event and for the many of the things we do, and I say, you can all leave your passport at the door, pick another one up, go back, you'll fit right in that culture because you share this idea of creating, building. You share the appreciation that entrepreneurship is messy. You share the willingness to operate in this very disruptive culture, and you're comfortable with it. You're going to go back and you'll be in that culture. Is this? Do you think we're correct? Obviously you've grown everything from Startup Weekend, for which I'm very proud to say I was at the first Startup Weekend that happened outside of the United States in Brazil, and a very exciting experience. But when I think about everything from Startup Weekend to Techstars to, of course, your thought leadership around the world. Are we right? Are we still right? Do we have a common culture across things?
Yeah.
Is Jonathan Altman's thesis here too a little wrong? Is it a little?
No.
Am I dreaming too big?
I think there's a couple of layers to it that are really powerful. The first, and I describe this in the context of companies, but I'm going to apply it to what you just said. In the context of companies, there's a phrase that I hate, and that's culture. And the phrase that I really hate is culture. I don't hate the phrase culture, I hate the phrase culture fit. Culture for people is a weak phrase by itself because it's a very general thing. It covers a lot of landscape. And then for many, many years, companies would say, look, we hire for culture fit. I hate that. You want to hire for culture add. You want people to come to your company to extend, and this is why culture is a tough word, I like to extend your cultural norms. And cultural norms can also be a substitute for, the word is the same as values. Like, what are your fundamental values? And if you start with your fundamental values and you're constantly trying to add people to your organization that extend your values, but within your norms, and change and modify and bring new things to it, but within your norms, you can end up with some really amazing stuff. If you try to add everybody to that just reinforces the same thing over and over again, it becomes a very stale, monocultural thing that doesn't grow and evolve. And in a lot of cases, it falls in on itself because it doesn't have the richness of different perspectives. Let's apply it to the Global Entrepreneur Network. Every country has different stuff going on. Everybody in this room from different places has, different environment, different cultural norms in your country, different government dynamics, different strengths, different resources, different opportunities, different resource value. Every place in the world has its strengths and weaknesses. In the context of creating companies and startup communities, the cultural norms are pretty consistent, but the things you put into that container can be very varied. And the cultural norms the values stay pretty consistent, but the experiences and the learning and the things that are needed are additive by all kinds of different perspectives. You said something that I think is so fascinating. You described the global financial crisis, the pandemic. We're a species that lurches from crisis to crisis. I don't know whether the AI is going to be our friend or it's going to exterminate us. Science fiction has been, and Hollywood movies have been telling us it's going to exterminate us for 50 years. Dear AI, please be my friend. I'm nice. Don't make me go away. Right? Like this idea that these things are always evolving, whether it's a geopolitical crisis, whether it's an environmental crisis, whether it's a business crisis, whether it's global, whether it's very local, and it's endless. If the cultural norms are robust and they're shared across a lot of different people in a lot of different geographies, you can come into any place and immediately be part of it. That was one of the things about Startup Weekend that was so awesome, is you could go to Startup Weekend anywhere in the world and feel great. I want to tell an anecdote about this that was in Rio. You probably don't know this anecdote. In 2013 at the GEC in Rio, Startup Weekend had its first global conference. So it was like a sub-conference within the conference.
It was on the beach.
It was on the beach. We had an evening event in this gigantic, it was probably the size of this thing, tented thing that somebody put up. And, there were 1,000 people there. And it was the end of a bunch of programming that had happened for the day. And it was very loud, and everybody was like, whatever. And I was tired. And I did what I do when I get tired in a crowd like that, and my energy's coming down. I sort of stood in the corner, and people came up to me. And so I could kind of have interactions with people rather than be in the middle of everything that was going on. And I'm at this stage, I'm about 46 or 47. A kid comes up to me. He's about 5'5". He's 21 years old. So for me, it felt like a kid, right? Like I was a generation away from him. And before I could do anything, he slaps a hat on my head and he gives me a gigantic hug. And I'm like, okay, I hug him back. And I said, what did I do? He said, you changed my life. In an accent I didn't quite get. I said, I changed your life? Well, I'm glad I was helpful. And they said, no. You changed my life. And I said, okay, well, that makes me feel good. What did I do? What did I do? He says, in my country, the idea of starting a company, that I could start a company, did not exist when I was growing up. Take off the hat and look at the hat. And I took off the hat and looked at the hat, and it said Startup Weekend, and I'm not going to say the country because I don't want to make it about a particular country, but I looked at the hat. It was a Middle Eastern country, it's just regionally, and I looked at the kid, and I had tears. Like, it was that moment where I realized, I knew the culture he had grown up with, I knew the kind of pressure he had had, and the idea that this thing, that he was one of 1,000 people that had come to this place and was one of hundreds of thousands of people that had had this experience. And for him, it changed the way he thought about what he could do in life. Was so rewarding. And I think that's what startup communities, that's what entrepreneurships, that's what this kind of activity doesn't just do in this moment, it does over a long arc. I think many people here that are in business understand the value of compounding. This activity compounds. It compounds over a long period of time. So the benefits don't necessarily accrue on day one. You don't see it right away, but you just stay after it.
The powerful thing about this for many of us is that adopting this mindset has helped us to be successful as startups or as instigators of startups. But actually, it in its own right has given back to us because it's taught us how to be better people.
Yep.
It's taught us about our humanity. I have to admit, there's too many occasions, and I would acknowledge this to this audience, many of whom may not know me, where it's actually brought me to tears. The experience of someone realizing their own worth, their own ability to do it themselves, which is one thing that the entrepreneurial experience gives back to us. It gives us that true sense of dignity. The number of people who've used that word with me, they said, you've no idea how this gave me, in my society and in my economy, this gave me the dignity. In fact, we actually, for a period of time, used to produce, we do a lot of work in figuring out how to get informal economies, how to move the ball forward to the formal, and for we actually do digital platforms for people to register and deregister companies and figure out better structures. But for a period of time, we used to hand out a card, and it said it was an entrepreneur card. It looked like a U.S. driver's license, okay, but it just said entrepreneur. And we had a reason that they had to do, they got to this card. Now, it wasn't an official government ID, but it was darn close with the aid agencies and the projects we were doing. And the number of people just said, the dignity that I felt, that the fact that I feel like I'm somebody now in this society. And that comes from the entrepreneur experience.
That's awesome.
Well, Brad, let's just, I know we're going to move on to one very exciting thing now as we wrap up, which is, the Power of Mentorship, Give First, your new book. We're going to, very happy, as Brad indicated, that this is, in many respects, a launch before you'll be able to buy it on Amazon. We couldn't be more flattered that you are doing this here at the GEC.
Well, I couldn't be more flattered that you were willing to do it here.
It is the spirit that I think brings together the trust among all of these disconnected communities. One, that this is something, as I've often said, this is about the possibility of endeavor. It's not just a narrow commercial experience. And I think what you've articulated in this book, which you were very kind to send me 2 months ago, is very much the essence of how we retain the humanity in the work that we do. But I love the fact that you said this isn't charity, this is helping you to also be successful at the same time. And so I'm very proud to say we are launching the book in the Gen Village. We're going to go to the Gen Village. We have books. The first 25 people in line are going to get a free copy of the book. There may be more to come, we'll see. But I'm very happy to say, Brad, we're going to have your book available for everybody. And I know talking about you were tired in Rio in the corner, we'll try not to wear you out too much. But Brad is going to be there to, as he said, he's going to say hello in as open and welcoming way as you do on email.
I'm going to stick around till about 6 o'clock.
Fantastic.
And then I've got to split. But happy to sign books for anybody that grabs a copy. And I'll just leave with, I want to define, just for everybody that's standing here, I see how the first 25 people are rushing out, they're very
this is a way to empty the room, Brad.
It's good. But just so everybody knows, I want to define Give First really quickly, which is in the book, but I just want to leave everybody with it. This is, again, this concept of give before you get. If you read Startup Communities and you remember it, it turned into this, what I will call a philosophy, not a religion. You adopt what you want of it. You don't have to follow it. Use it when it makes sense. The idea of Give First is that you're willing to enter into something, you're willing to put effort into something without knowing what you're going to get back. It's not altruistic. You expect to get something back. You just don't know from whom, when, over what time period, in what consideration, in what magnitude. And my premise was that if you, as an individual, are willing to put energy into a system, if you get enough people putting energy into the system, a flywheel starts to turn and stuff comes back to you that you would never expect, from all kinds of places that you would never expect. The guy that stuck that hat on my head, I still have that hat. It's a hat that I treasure. I don't treasure the hat because I don't have free baseball caps. I have a lot of free baseball caps in my life, but that one meant something to me. And getting a free baseball cap back, by the way of a cap from an organization that I probably helped pay for, was awesome, because it was not the monetary thing I got back, it was the representation of the experience that came back. So this idea of Give First is not that you're trying to get transactionally compensated, but that you're doing these things with a reward that will come back in some way over some period of time in your life.
Brad, what you're talking about in many respects is just faith. You know that you're going to give. At some point, it's going to come back. Well, everybody, please join me in a warm thank you to Brad Feld.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody in this community.